I've been working now for 25 years, and so I wanted to share my career journey with you, including salaries, to show you how I've 100x'd my salary since the day I started working to the current day. Now, I started work when I was 15. Obviously, like a lot of people do, you have the odd part-time job here and there. I started out doing a paper round, had a small kind of car washing business, stuff like that, just little things. But my first actual job was a Saturday job. I used to go into a warehouse and have to pack Night and Day magazine into what I think was the Sunday Times, something like that. If you're a reader of that magazine, you'll know which paper that was inserted into, and basically used to go through pallets of newspapers and magazines, putting them in. That paid me based on the amount of work I did, but it averaged out at £1,200 per year. So at the age of 15, I started on £1,200. When I turned 16, obviously the opportunities open up to you a little bit more because you can be legally employed by far more employers. But I actually moved into working at a college in Oxford. So I'm from Oxfordshire. I worked at one of the colleges, which essentially is where all the uni students go. So I was doing some working in the catering team there, being a waiter and pot washing, that sort of thing. And I was doing that kind of evenings and weekends, obviously in and around college work. So at the age of 16, I was earning £2,500 per year. Now, as I ended my first year at college, I actually went to college to learn accounting. At that time, I had turned 17 and had to give up that part-time job and got a job at a chartered accountant's. That was the path that I thought I wanted to go on. My starting salary for a full-time position, which actually gave me a kind of a day release. So you could argue it was part-time or full-time. I worked 4 days, went to college for 1 day, and they paid me £6,000 per year for the privilege. Now, this was back in 2002. I don't know what that looks like in terms of inflation, but as you can see, my next few salaries will prove to be pretty reasonable salaries for the time. So at 17, I was earning £6,000. Now, about 6 to 9 months into that role, I realised very, very quickly that chartered accounting was not something that I wanted to do. I no longer wanted to be an accountant, and whilst I love finance, as I do now, I wanted to move into kind of more generic finance roles. So I was looking at kind of accounts payable, credit controller, that sort of role. And the next role I landed was an accounts payable clerk, and that basically doubled my salary to 12,000. Now that was probably full time. I went through a couple of roles over the next 12 months or so, but that was a nice way to double my salary to 12,000. After that, when I turned 19, I was working in a warehouse, and you might think that that's quite a stretch. Yes. Lots of my mates were working in a warehouse. They were doing forklift work and stuff like that. They were earning far more money than I was while sat in the office. Now, I was thinking, working in finance, that should probably not be the case. And so I actually left that and did kind of a 12 to 18 months working in warehouses, and for the privilege was paid considerably more. Once I got my forklift license, I was paid £17,500, a nice £5,500 increase. Before I turned 20, I was in and out of various roles doing temping and kind of jumped back to finance and stuff, but at the point I actually turned 20, I'd moved back into the office doing finance roles, and it was kind of processing expense payments and allocating incoming payments for a large company in Oxford. And when I got my permanent contract there, that paid me £20,000 at the age of 20. Wasn't bad, and would be a target that I would want to maintain throughout my life. I wanted to earn the salary that was equal to my age. So being on 20k at 20 was pretty satisfying. And I actually stayed at that company for several years. So the only increases from then on were really kind of small bonuses that were paid to us, but also kind of year-on-year increases. So at the age of 21, I was on 21. At the age of 22, I was on 22. And then it was at the age of 23 that I managed to get a role into a different team within the same company still. And then my boss at the time went on maternity leave, and I was able to take her team lead role. And that was paying a little bit more. So at the age of 23, I jumped up to £25,000, and I stayed in and around there until I turned 25. And then when I left that company, I moved into the charity sector. So my sister was working at a charity at the time and said, there's a payments team manager role, go in here, why don't you apply for it? And I was very comfortable with where I was, but decided to take the leap, and so was fortunate enough to get that payments team manager position and bump my salary ever so slightly to 27,000. Now, I stayed in that role for quite a few years. Again, was just getting annual increases, 2, 3, 4%. So between the age of 26 and 29, I moved from 27,000 to £30,000. From then on, I really kind of wanted to start progressing. I've always wanted to do well in my career. I've wanted to push on to kind of manager and leadership positions. I was afforded the opportunity for a secondment into another role where I became an operational improvement manager. Now that bumped my salary from 30,000 to 35,000, which was a nice healthy bump and allowed me to take on a bit more responsibility. It was kind of part project management, part kind of process improvement, and it was really looking for efficiencies. And I was still working at that same charity. And then I got what I call my big break. A few things happened, people left the business, restructures happened, and I was able to capitalize on that and make a push for a senior management position. I was successful in what was initially supposed to be kind of a 6-month secondment, but actually turned it out to be a permanent role, which was fantastic. So at the age of 31, I was on £45,000. Now I stayed in that position or variations of that position within that charity for a couple of years. I was the payments team manager, so the senior manager of the position I used to be for a little while, and then moved into another department to become a senior operations manager. By the time I left that payments team role at 33, I was on £47,000, and then that jump across to the senior operations manager role gave me a small increase to £48,000. So I'm 34, I'm doing pretty well, but hit a bit of a ceiling, a bit of a plateau in terms of my progression, both at salary and at seniority role level. Couldn't really move back into payments because the payments team had been moved into finance, whereas before it was kind of a wider part of operations. And the head of finance at that particular charity had to be a chartered accountant, and I couldn't really see myself going back into that. And obviously I dropped that much earlier on in my career and took a fairly wild decision to completely change career. So kind of this really started at the age of 33. I started learning web design, how to manage servers and things like that. I wanted to be kind of a system administrator or web designer, and spent a good 12 months learning that in my own time. I could talk more about that in a separate video, but basically the long and short of it is at the age of 34, towards the end of the year, I picked up my first ever tech role as a junior DevOps engineer. Now that was a fairly large salary decrease to £30,000, but I was confident that with the right skills and the way the tech market was moving, I could hopefully catch the wave to increase my salary back to where it was at least. And that move into tech proved to be a great and very lucky decision on my part. I did catch the absolute growing wave of DevOps in particular in the UK, and through a combination of luck and COVID and a huge surge in the market, I was able over the next few years to ramp my salary up considerably. So I stayed in that first role for just 6 months before I was reached out to on LinkedIn by another company in Oxfordshire looking for a junior to mid-level DevOps engineer, and they were offering £52,000 plus bonus. Now I'll just use £52,000 for the sake of comparison. So at 35, 52k was my salary. The bonus was around 3 or 4k. So I stayed there for around 12 months before I was then approached again for a third role, actually at a senior level, despite my lack of experience really on the surface, only 18 months working in tech plus the year kind of I was training. So at the age of 36, I managed to double my age and get onto £72,000. Now that company I stayed at for about 18 or 19 months, and the market, as I said, was surging. And so I went into work one day off the back of actually discussing leaving. I had kind of interviews lined up for companies like ASOS and Boohoo, Santander, ITV. I could have actually worked on the ITVX platform at the time, but I came in to work one day to the email that we had been given a market alignment pay rise, and they jumped my salary from 72,000 to 88,000. And I thought I'd just stick around for a little while longer. So at 37, I'm now earning £88,000. Okay, so despite that company giving me that pay rise, you'd think I'd stick around, right? But just 6 months later, as I said, I did move into another company, a much smaller company, a startup trying to scale up, and that is the same company that I'm at now. I left there still whilst I was 37, and not for the money really. The salary they paid me was £95,000, but that wasn't really the reason for going. I wanted to work in a smaller, close-knit team, where I was one of a dozen DevOps engineers at the previous company. And as luck would have it, 2 months after me joining, my boss leaves the business, and I think with my management experience, why don't I just go for his role? I was very fortunate to get that and got put on £105,000 still at the age of 37. So now I'm a DevOps team lead, having only been in tech for what, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. It's quite unusual, and not many people can follow in that path, particularly now where the market has really slowed down in the UK for tech. And like I said, it is still the company I'm at now. Now, this company was doing pretty well when I joined, and so at the age of 38, with costs rising at home, they gave us all a kind of cost of living increase of 7%, which put me on £112,000. Now, for the last couple of years, I've still been at that same company, but through restructures and whatever, my responsibilities have started to change. So as I said, I came in as a senior DevOps engineer. I moved to a DevOps team lead, and then a restructure happened where I took on a bunch of cloud developers, data engineers, and testers, and became the platform engineering manager at my company. Obviously, with that additional responsibility comes extra money, and so at the age of 39, I was on £120,000 and have 100x'd my salary since 15. But it doesn't stop there. On top of that £120,000, I also have to do on-call. There's a few of us in rotation, and at the time I was getting around £4,500 per year on top of that. So whilst my base salary was 120, my total income was around £124,500. So this time last year, I just turned 40 and I was on a very similar salary. However, in October last year, while still being 40, I applied to reduce my hours. There's a funny thing that happens in the UK when you start to earn above £100,000 and you start to lose your personal allowance. I know what you're thinking. You earn over 100k, who cares? You have to pay a bit of extra tax. But between 100,000 and 125,000 pounds, you start to lose your personal allowance. You know, that first 12,570 pounds that everybody gets tax free, that starts to get taken away from you. So the effective tax rate between 100 and 125 is actually 60%. I wanted to avoid that, and so I was putting lots of money into my pension, but figured whilst I want to retire early, I would much rather have the time off. Now, I do social media and have done for a couple of years now, and I wanted a day dedicated to that. So I put in a request to reduce my hours from 5 full days to 4 full days, thus reducing my salary by £24,000. And then also since then, this week, the company have given a 3% pay rise, and we didn't get a pay rise last year, so that's a welcome relief. And so as I turn 41 in the next couple of weeks, my salary is £99,500. And there is now only 2 of us doing the on-call rotation, so I get an additional £6,500 on top of that, which takes me to a total income per year now, as I tick over to 41, of £106,000. I hope that's of some use or inspiration to some of you. I'm not doing it to brag, it's just my journey, and I try to be open and honest about everything in my finances. I've talked about my IVA, I've talked about how much I have in my pensions, how little I have in my investments, how I've had investments and sold them, everything, how I've bought my house, whatever. So I try to share everything. It's just for transparency more than anything. If there is anything else about anything that I talk about on this channel, or indeed in this video, that you would like to hear more about, let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, do like and subscribe.